Didn't have my proper thing selected, my proper device selected, which is odd because it normally does it. So I guess we're gonna start from the top all over again. From the Tomes, Twitch TV, From the Tomes, Fox and Board Games, at YouTube, foxandboardgames.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Fox and Board Games. Thanks for the support. Thanks for stopping in. Thanks for chatting or just lurking. Whatever everybody likes to do is cool with me. The biggest thing you can do is subscribe and like my stuff. So yeah. So as I was just saying, thanks PJ for alerting me that I hadn't. I said the first thing I said is let's see how this goes. I might be a little bit rusty, and sure enough, I forgot to switch over my signal. Actually, I had the mic up for something yesterday, some other thing yesterday, and I forgot to switch it back on this machine. But some of you know I had a medical procedure last week, which kind of derailed the rest of the week. I guess I had this delusion. I'll be out of it for a day or so. No big deal. I'll be back. I'll be on Wednesday night probably. No. I was by Saturday is the first time I started feeling like, or Sunday actually. Yesterday is the first time I kind of like woke up and thought, yeah, I don't feel too awful. I guess a large infusion of narcotics during the procedure made me feel Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning that I'm feeling great. I feel normal. Nothing's wrong here. And then sure enough, it started hitting. So as I said before, this is not going to become a PSA. This is not going to become a commercial for anything. But well, except for the commercials Twitch puts on, of course. But if you're at a point in life and your doctor says you should really get something looked at, whether it's a procedure or it's a screening, or should I say a test or a screening, don't hesitate. Don't say no. Don't say, oh, it's not a big deal. Those doctors don't know what they're talking about. I'll deal with it later. Because I've been told by several people, including the staff who was there at the hospital, it's a really good thing you're taking care of this now and you got this looked at, because this could have been really bad in a couple of years. So, yeah, do it. It's not fun. It's been a long week. So, yeah, late. It could have very easily, and again, it's not something that I thought was ever going to be an issue with me, just because of family history and stuff like that. And fortunately, everything looks really good. I'm waiting to hear probably tomorrow or the end of the week from the doctor on some results, but he seemed to think it all looked really good. But in the end, of course, had I said, yeah, I don't really want to deal with all that. And I've already had friends say, well, it's great you did this because I probably would have just put it off. I'm like, well, it was made clear to me that putting putting it off was probably a really, really bad idea. So I'm glad I didn't do that. I'm glad I wasn't one of those people. I'm not even going to say one of those guys, because one of the people who said this to me about, I'm glad you took care of it, because I would have put it off, is actually a friend of mine who's a woman. And, I was kind of surprised to hear them say that. I was like, really? So yeah, it would be such a bother. I'm like, well, the runner up, the runner up prize is a much bigger bother. So get your stuff taken care of. And I understand for a lot of people, it's also a health insurance issue. And I'm fortunate that even now, while I am on this sabbatical, I maintain my insurance. And I understand this is a big issue in the U.S. And despite what people think, it's not a big issue in most other parts of the world, developed parts of the world. And I'm not going to make this a political advertisement either, but it's ridiculous that, let's say, if I'd had a parallel situation 15 years ago, I literally couldn't have afforded to get this done. I would have, been absolutely unable to pay for it through any conventional means. So that's a whole other issue. That's a whole other bag of snakes, which I'm not gonna even go down the road here. Won't be a long stream today. I'm still getting back to it. I do plan to be on for a little bit tomorrow, because I have a lot of writing to do. A lot of things are coming down the pike, which is what I'm going to talk about today. And then, of course, Wednesday night, we'll maybe finally get to our chat. Finally get to our low, medium, high magic chat. We'll actually see. Let me check something before I start the rest of my diatribe. Got any activity on a couple things I set up? A couple things I'm going to talk about. So, well, no, I guess I'll just switch right over there. So, so I'll be talking about this in my. Let's see. Thank you. No, I've got several friends who just put it on and lurk for stream support, and I'm grateful for that, and I do that too. Monday nights, in fact, Monday nights, Play Without Ego. My friend Tom Curzon is on here quite a bit. He runs a D&D game, and they're literally doing it. They're playing without ego. They're doing it just, for people who just want to see D&D. There's no grand plan or motive. But tune in for that. And, I often lurk on that too. Like I'll be doing something else and I'll put it on, but I've tried to at least come on for part of it every week since he started. Some weeks are more successful. But tonight I'll make sure I do it because I've just mentally reminded myself that it's tonight if Tom didn't send a reminder later. Which reminds me, I should start using that mailing list that I got a few add-ons from PAX. I already filled that out, PAX. Funny enough, I said I got from PAX and I got a survey email from them that I already filled out. Well, maybe I'll fill it out again. Oh, I know why. 'Cause I had 2 badges. Okay. I'll get the other badge holder. The other badge holder varied throughout the weekend. I think about 3 other people were the badge holder throughout the weekend for various things. That's fine. Hello. How are you? I haven't seen you on in a little while. Thanks for tuning in. So, what's been going on with me this week? Well, while I've been convalescing post-surgery, I decided to make some use of the time. I really wasn't in the headspace to do a lot of writing until the weekend. My thoughts were kind of still disjointed, and I really had to focus and tune in on a few things. But I did work on my webpage quite a bit. That's what we're going to take a look at now. And let's see if I can get this right. I spent a half hour getting ready for the stream, which I thought was going to take me 10 minutes. Then I come on and I didn't have my voice set up, so. But, oh wow. It automatically said it was going to do it. Thank you. So, here's the webpage for the game company in the game. And I think the big news is that I have officially put myself out as a GM for hire. It's been something that quite a few people have mentioned to me that I should do. And I was really reluctant to do it for a number of reasons. Having done freelancing and contracting for creative stuff before, I know it has to be a job. It can't be like, well, when I feel like doing it, I'll work on this. I mean, if you have someone paying you to do something, you have to be on top. You have to prep it. You have to get ready for it. That ties into a much bigger discussion about where I'm at personally and creatively, and how I feel about a change in life path in the coming years. So I'll leave it at that because I shouldn't say much more. I can't say much more until it's a thing. But I do plan to make the game company and gaming a much bigger focus in my life. And I really had to go to PAX, and I really had to go and run for other people in a public setting. And I haven't done that in a very long time. PJ, that's where I met PJ. It's where I met Neil, who comes on here. It's where I met quite a few of my regulars who come on here, running games at conventions. And I haven't done it in a really long time. And I really wasn't sure how I'd feel. And as I said last week, in the last stream I did, that I really felt like I loved it. I was shocked how much I enjoyed it. Now, guaranteed I had a really good group of players. Like one of those really good, like role play focused, mature groups that didn't complain. They loved the story. They loved the world. They gave suggestions, which are great. But, it was guaranteed that was a specific experience. But I wasn't sure how I would feel about doing this. But I think I can do it. I think I'm ready to do it. I've been doing it a really long time. Been running these things 35 years, and I've refined it to a point that I've, in recent memory, not had a group, not have a good time. I mean, I've really in all different levels. Like, I talk about the heavy role play thing. Like our D&D game, our at one point weekly D&D game for almost 2 years was by far not always this intellectual exercise. It was pretty much what you think. So, I can run different ways, different styles, different settings. So I felt like maybe this is a point that I'm not only going to have some scheduled games, which I'll take a look at in a moment on Roll20, but I'm gonna put myself out there to run custom gaming for groups. The follow up to this is, while I feel, and I talked a little bit this when I was on here last week with Blake and Wolfie, while I feel that this is a bubble, and I feel that the gaming bubble will pop, and it won't be this huge pop craze because nothing's ever this huge pop craze. I think it's here to stay for a while. And I think now we have the entrance point that if you're serious about it, you can dig your way into it. And I wish I'd started this a number of years ago. And I didn't for a few reasons. I guess I didn't realize how big it had become pop culture wise. Like I said, even when I was at PAX 3 years ago, it was still very much a game convention. It wasn't this, and especially D&D wasn't this mass culture explosion that it is now. And like I said, when you walk through the Pennsylvania Convention Center in Philadelphia, which is quite large, and there are lines, the entire entranceway, just past the main checkpoint, the entrance checkpoint, security checkpoint, COVID checkpoint, there are these lines of people lining up to get into a D&D game. You think, wow, like everything has changed. So I think I can offer a lot. I have my little history here, my game master bio, I have a little bit more about the process of signing up to play a game with me. Big thanks to Alyssa Rhiannon Clark. She helped me go through this. She took a read through it and gave me some great suggestions in terms of paring it down, making it a little more concise, which I knew I had to do. I showed her the very first draft before I showed it to a few people. But I didn't put it out publicly. And this is the first time I'm actually talking about this publicly. So I want to do it on the stream. So thanks for tuning in and thanks for watching it later. So you're getting a little preview. But yeah, so thank you. Thanks for the best of luck. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. And I've been talking to a few people about this for just over a year now. I've been hemming and hawing. But I have gotten such a sheer amount of satisfaction over being primarily a game writer these past several months. It's kind of surreal, and I kind of want to keep it going, and I want to make it a mainstay instead of that thing I do when I have nothing else to do. And here's the rates and policies and all that. So again, anybody who's interested can go take a look. If you pop by this stream later, go take a look. I'm not a pusher yet. I can't really be. There's this whole other subtext to this as to why I can't even really do this at the scale I want yet. And it's contractual with my current employer. So once I see how things develop with that over the next year, then this might even become more of a mainstay thing. But having said that, I've got some games up on Roll20. So for those of you who might want to play with me, who don't get to play games with me regularly, feel free to do it. I have 4 sessions running right now on Roll20. This, of course, is the link to just get to the custom gaming. This is for the new Call of Cthulhu scenario I'm working on, Cold Plague, which will be an intro scenario. I'll kind of learn to play Call of Cthulhu, or a quick start Call of Cthulhu scenario that's rules light. And I think there's a call for that. on all of Roll20. I think the last time I looked, there were only 8 or 10 Call of Cthulhu scenarios. Only I think one or two of those are beginner friendly and are not major campaigns. And unlike the, let's say, hundreds of D&D games that are up there, like hundreds and hundreds of D&D games. There is a D&D game, a beginner's D&D game. If somebody wants to learn to play D&D and pay me to run it, I will do that. Honestly, D&D is not my primary game that I like to run, and I think I've made that clear. I like D&D. I play it, I run it, but there are other games I run, and there are people who really love and are really good at running D&D. And I'd rather focus on running other games. But I also know that if you're going to attempt to do this with any kind of business sense in mind, you're going to have to run some D&D, right? So that's at least to start. Then I have the two Tales of the Hard Land scenarios. All of these, not the D&D game. The Call of Cthulhu, Cold Plague, and the Call of Cthulhu, Cold Plague, Curse of Sicaria, and Blood Out of Bondage from Tales of the Hard Land will be at Total Confusion in Massachusetts. Not too far from PJ, not too close, but not too far. And I know he said he and Jen were going to try to make it out, but that'd be great. This is all assuming there's no major blizzard. Unlike the last time I traveled to Massachusetts in the winter. Oh, they're not predicting any bad weather. I should be fine for a few days. No, nor'easter, ice storms. That was the best part. That and blinding snow. Trying to get home in it was definitely not the smartest thing. And this year I will pay close attention to the weather, either coming or going. If I have to miss the con or miss a day or two of the con, let's see. So, that's a really great point. That's such a great point in terms of, it's an interesting career. I agree. I mean, my current career is in the arts and academia. My problem in the arts has always been that everything I really love doing art-wise is not commercially viable. Most of my personal artwork falls to the realm of the conceptual and the abstract. A lot of it is not the kind of stuff people are ever going to hang on their wall. A lot of I do shoot a lot of landscape photography, and that tends to have a little bit more of a draw. I'm about to be cat bombed. It has a little bit more of a draw. And photography is going to play into all this in terms of my doing this as a career. Photography will definitely also be an income source, but I can't do that yet contractually. So again, I'm kind of at that weird point that I have to deal with the sabbatical structure and work within that for now and start this to kind of get it rolling. Then hopefully by the end of sabbatical, I'll have an idea as to where I can deal with it. I'm pretty good at entertaining, which is funny because, I always say to people, like, interpersonally, I'm much more introverted. But when it comes to speaking to groups or dealing with groups, like being a classroom teacher, or college teacher, it's always been very natural to me. And even as a young child, I had several little bit stage performances in school plays. And I never had the slightest bit of fear. I've done poetry readings for 1,000 people. I've played music for a couple thousand people. It just isn't a thing that I have anxiety about it like everybody does. What if this goes wrong, But it's never anything that I've had such a fear that I've been paralyzed into not doing it. Unlike some people I know who are, frankly, far better musicians or performers than I am, but some people just aren't built to perform. And that's just a thing. That's just a body, brain makeup, So the one thing I've got going for me is I've literally no fear of doing this, I don't have any anxiety about the actual performance or the play or the gameplay. And I've been playing and running these games so long, I'm very adaptable. But what you say is, someone being very niche, that, as I just said, again, anyone who's played one of my games that have been in this really honest, horror game, knows I'm usually way beyond the level of comfort in my horror than most people are. And I'm not even talking about shock. I'm not even talking about grim dark stuff. I'm talking about just like my the way that I'm willing to present content and situations. To me, horror role playing in particular needs to be somewhat uncomfortable. And again, I'm not saying that because I'm a creep or because I want to, creep everybody out, but yeah, you find out that most people don't want that. They want a power fantasy. And D&D, that's why D&D is so popular, because you get to be the superhero. I mean, D&D really at this point is a superhero game. And even Tales of the Hard Land is a superhero game. I mean, your characters are superpowered. It's grittier, it's grimier, it's dark fantasy, it's set in a more primitive world. It's more, sword and sorcery, Conan-ish than it is D&D, but you're still a superhero, effectively. And it's funny because I think I mentioned this last time. The one really great playtest feedback I got is the guy who was playing the Gladiator was like, rolling all those dice made me feel really epic. I'm like, this is exactly the kind of thing that I was shooting for, that I wanted you to feel like, oh yeah, I swung that giant war club and I threw those three guys across the room, and I just kept fighting and I feel very heroic, and the various spellcasters felt like they could do really cool stuff with their spells, and that's what I was going for. So that is also, but it's a different world. It's a different world than D&D. So, yeah, D&D is very popular, and I'd be a fool. I'd be an absolute fool not to run some D&D. Now, the D&D game that I'm going to run, as it pops up in yet another new link, whose dumb idea was that? It's mine. Switch it over to that one. So this is a very light D&D adventure that I ran for. This was the first story I ran for the group that turned into this one actually has like a number of views, which is interesting. So people are looking at these already. No signups yet, but it's all right. Even if this first round gets no signups, I'm fine. Now I have everything set up and it's getting ready to go. And I did make a profile on Start Playing Games, which is more or less this centralized point from which you can hire a game master. It's like, I don't know, Tinder for gaming. I don't know. It's like, again, the fact that this is all a thing is so weird to me. But I did make an account on here. There I am. So yeah, they're still approving me, which is okay. Hey, if they don't approve me, that's okay too. This is such a basic D&D game. It's more like a Scooby-Doo adventure. Okay, it's meant for anybody, because the original group that I ran this for, over half had never even considered playing a role-playing game before. They had such a minimal knowledge of it, a peripheral knowledge of it, that they were coming mostly to hang out with their friends. So this particular scenario, that's kind of what it is. Like, really, seriously, think Scooby-Doo. You're good. It's nothing like I'd even normally run as a straight D&D game. It's not dark. There's nothing going on there that's going to upset anybody. Actually, I'll just go to my Roll20 profile. So this was kind of my big news for the. I don't like Coldplay, which is sure to scare people. No, it's not even that scary for a Call of Cthulhu adventure. I say it's probably more of a mystery, a creepy mystery. I mean, it's dealing with the 1922 cold plague outbreak, on Cape Cod. So that's going to be interesting. The current Tales game I'm running, if you've watched any of the playthroughs, which is over at YouTube at Fox and Board Games, I have 3 sessions up. We're going to be playing again this Saturday. One of the first things that, I forget who it was, somebody, either Diana or Mel, said was, you're going to put a content warning on this, right? I mean, there is everything from, murder to corpse mutilation to black magic to the kind of stuff that I think anyone who's known me for a long time is like, oh, yeah, that's what his games are going to look like. Like these really kind of trips into an H.P. Lovecraft or Stephen King or Clive Barker story. These kind of dark psychological trips. I still think it's kind of a funny game, though. I mean, it's dark. There's twisted stuff, but there's been quite a bit of humor so far. So again, I'm not so wrapped up in myself or so wrapped up in the whole twisted persona that I'm gonna make these things impossible to sit through. So that one of the other games, this is the game that I've run for Call of Cthulhu, for Tales of the Hallowed Land several times, both on Roll20 and in person already, and I ran this at PAX. Blood Out of Bondage, which is kind of an intro to the world and the scenario, in world and the characters. And it's a little heavy, it's a little dark, but it's still not. I mean, it's no worse than you've ever seen in like anime, or it's certainly no worse than a lot of the HBO series that are out there. It's definitely no worse than Game of Thrones. I mean, again, to me, there were points of Game of Thrones where I was like, okay, like that wasn't even necessary. That was just purely for shock and horror value, and it worked. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it, but I'm saying like that show was so pop culture, but it was so kind of over the top in that regard. And the Curse of Sicaria is a new one that I'm in the process of writing up. I mean, in my head it's already written. I just have to hammer out the details and descriptions. Cold Plague is almost there. Curse of Sicaria is there. It's been in my head for quite a while, and that's like a 2-hour long intro to Tales of the Hallowed Land, which I plan to also take to Total Confusion at the end of February. So that's going to be some fun stuff. I'm excited about it. It was a weird state for a few days the end of last week where I couldn't do much. I wasn't really, I was so mentally prepared for the medical procedure and getting feedback about it, and what if things don't go exactly like they hope and it's a little dicier than we are afraid of. I was like all prepared for this. What I wasn't prepared for was just feeling like I do nothing but sit on my ass for 3 days. I really kind of wasn't mentally prepared for that. So I was like, all right, let me do something. So I started getting all of this stuff in place, all of this Pro GM stuff in place. And like I said, I think it was almost 2 years ago now that a few people said to me, there's a lot of people doing this. You should look at this. And, at the time, that was like kind of halfway through or at the end of the pandemic. And I knew I was going to be going back to teaching in person. And I was kind of like, yeah, like I'd really kind of rather not start that and try to juggle getting back to school. But now that I've been out for 8 months, and I have about another 8 months to go before I have to think about going back, I decided, I think it's time. I don't think this is the kind of thing I can or I should put off any further. I think it's an opportunity. And you know what? I don't think it's going to become my full-time job. Like, I don't think it could become that sustaining unless I got really fortunate in terms of a slot, or I happen to get a really prominent game writer or influencer as a player. I'm not deluding myself. But this, of course, also is all feeding into me getting Fox and Board Games going. Now, I have to make an appointment to speak with him this week because last week I was just too out of it. Chris Urban, who is a young game designer, student / former student, who wants to publish through me, brought his tabletop game, his what are they called? Board games, that thing. His board game to the Unpub tables that were originally going to be my slots in the Unpub section of PAX East, and people really got into it. So, this is all feeding into something bigger. This isn't just like, oh, I'm going to be a pro GM for the rest of my life. I mean, I've never thought like that, first of all. But I think this is all a contributor. So, Gamma World. Let's talk about Gamma World. So the funny thing is, I actually have Gamma World on the list of games I've run. I haven't looked at the new version. We have a very long history with Gamma World in our gaming group. So I mean, of course, I played it when it first came out because I'm really old, and I ran it when it first came out, and it was like Mad Max with mutants and this ridiculous stuff, and it was very D&D like, but it wasn't like originally. It was nothing system wise like D&D. I think it was Percentile. I don't know if Blake's around now. He might be able to speak of it. The last Gamma World games we played, Blake ran, and they still live in infamy because they just went right over the top of any kind of social acceptability. We were all in college age at the time, and it became a mess. It just became. I'm so glad we didn't have video on our phones, or we didn't have smartphones back then, so nobody has evidence. We were literally just talking about this. Nobody has evidence of these ridiculous game sessions we had, especially with Gamma World. Gamma World's a blast, and I should probably pick up the new version. You know what? It can almost work as fourth ed. Like I don't even know if it would bother me that it was fourth ed because it's like it was kind of always a mess anyway. Like it wasn't the bed. The original versions were definitely not the best designed games. A lot of the early TSR games really weren't great in terms of game design. They were based off old war game mechanics. I mean, they weren't very good games by today's standards. You know, so um, yeah, I just saw what you said before. And spooky mystery, yeah. So I tried to emphasize like the Call of Cthulhu and the Blackmore Manor. I'm going to emphasize to people if they want to sign up. Look, like these are very much mystery games. And like I said, I got very fortunate at PAX that I had a group. Now Blood Out of Bondage is a little bit of that, and then a little bit of adventure and combat. And I got fortunate that I had a group that got really deep into it and really role play focused group. So it was good. But what's really funny is like, especially a lot of newer players that I've talked to, like a lot of the LARPers I know, or maybe in the late millennial age to early Xennial age, where they've been like, yeah, we play D&D, but we don't even really like the game that much. Like, we don't like the system, we don't like the structure. And so it's interesting. So there's a lot of people who are out there who are playing it because it's what's there and it's available. Now, I mean, again, I like D&D, but right, there is very little actual social and character interaction and role play support. And what I have always said about D&D is that I'm shocked it's so popular because it's not a particularly streamlined or simple game to play. It's actually quite complicated when you get down to it. I mean, when you have to, at least now D&D Beyond makes this easier, but when you have to know where to find, like, I don't know, 2 dozen different spells in the descriptions, or somebody has to have them available, like that to me isn't simple. That's not a simple, easy game. And it just, I guess I'm always kind of boggled that it has become as popular only because of the branding, only because it's Dungeons and Dragons, and it has the nostalgia of the thing that people used to do in the 80s. Now, again, my joke about that is it's not like you see on TV shows now where everybody was playing D&D and D and it was cool. Like only the total outcasts and freaks and losers were playing D&D, self included. So that's why I just find this whole thing very humorous. I find the whole surge of it very, very ironic and very humorous on many levels. But I'll take it. I'll take it. As a person who's always wanted to write and run and play games for a living, I mean, really, I'm not going to turn my nose up at it at all. So. It's all this. Huh. Okay, so I haven't seen so we've done Warhammer Fantasy. Now Warhammer Fantasy is really like, I mean, it's very Monty Python-esque by its very nature. That's always been Warhammer. It was a satire. It was a satire on Cold War Europe. It was a satire on Dungeons and Dragons. It is a very British game. The humor is very self-deprecating and very British, and I really love Warhammer Fantasy. But again, that's a really crunchy game. I would have to take a look at anything that's been done really recently. I mean, we're working on, I think, the most recent version of Warhammer Fantasy. I love it. I love Warhammer. I've always loved the Warhammer world because it never took itself seriously. It never took any part of itself seriously. Having said that, that's not a game I'd run with a new group at all. I mean, I think it's or with a group who's never played an RPG. It's just a lot to digest. GW. Okay, so I'm thinking Games Workshop. I'm like, yeah, no, I wouldn't call that streamlined. I'm like, there's like more charts there. That yeah, more chart. It's a very old school in that regard. Okay, yeah. So I haven't seen the new Gamma World, but yeah, well, that was the funny part about Gamma World. Like anything that could happen to your character is not necessarily anything you even your character quote progression could get worse. It was hilarious because you're like, oh, I got a mutation that makes me stink constantly, and I get like minuses off all my social rolls forever, and that's just the way Gamma World always was. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those games I should probably revisit because it's just so ridiculous and it's fun, and it was never one of those games that I ever had a hang up about playing and not taking seriously. So, and I think that's something that would go over. So it's really funny. Like when I was submitting the stuff to TotalCon, like they basically just like when they saw it wasn't D&D, they just greenlighted it. They were like, we're definitely gonna approve your stuff. You can start getting ready. We have to do the whole process. I was like, because it takes like 2 to 3 weeks for it to go into their system. And I got a note from them saying, this looks great. Just to let you know, we are gonna approve it. We'll comp you a badge. I was like, okay. And they seemed really thrilled that it wasn't more D&D, you know. And again, I like D&D, and I will always play it, and I will always enjoy it. But I will run it again. We're still kind of at a weird juncture with our in-person group. Like, how are we gonna approach it? Because we've lost basically half the group for various reasons, or they've taken a break or opted out, not lost. Nothing horrendous has happened to them. But where I'm going to say like, okay, well, if we're going to continue D&D, is it going to be the same game? Is it going to where we're going to start new characters? Are we going to and on truthfully like until this, well, yeah, of course they did, of course they did. Yeah, so I mean, the evolution was 3.5 was so magic like. Now, mind you, I love 3.5. It's still my favorite edition of the game. But it's so many numbers. It's so many things to count. It's so many points to add on to everything you do. It's like a magic deck. Your character is like a magic deck. And I remember when I made that comment on a forum not too long after 3.5 came out, and people just like jumped all over me. And then Wizards was basically like Wizards slash Hasbro was basically like, yeah, we took a lot of our concepts from collectible card games. I'm like, to anybody who has any clue about any of this, 4.0 was unapologetically an attempt to turn an RPG into an MMO, thinking like, oh, all those people who play WoW and spend hours and hours of their life playing WoW are gonna start playing this now because it looks and acts like WoW. Boy, was that a mistake? 'Cause I don't know. I played a little bit of Fourth Ed with a local group. Hey, it was awful. It was an awful game. It made a good board game though. It made a fairly good board game. So I did play some of the board game renditions of it. And I'm like, it's a good tactical board game. It's a horrible, horrible version of a role playing game. And I think Fifth Ed sits about where it needs to sit. You can get a group running in Fifth Ed in 20 minutes. Really. But you can make it more complex if you want to. But as I said, there's still a lot that I think is lacking from Fifth Ed. There's a lot of things that wasn't placed in the game in a mechanical fashion, or at least in a supported fashion, like the social aspects that I think really could have been cool. But that's okay. There's other games too. So, that's why I'm kind of at the point that I think instead of trying to focus on running D&D as a mainstay for any kind of quote professional gaming, I'm going to focus on Call of Cthulhu, and of course, again, kind of the one of the long games of this is in fact to get Tales out there and to get that more prominently placed And the hope is, all right, if I run some D&D games and Call of Cthulhu games and people love them, when I say, hey, by the way, I'm writing this game, it's coming out, kickstarting it in 3 months, here's the info. If you're interested in keeping up with me, keep up with me. So I think that's going to be a thing. I think it's going to be a thing. So where am I with that game? Well, as I said, I'm running several scenarios right now. I'm wrapping up Web of the Four Hands, which is the game which has been played by my in-person group. I predict 3 more sessions, 3 to 4 more sessions of that, maybe. Probably no more than 4. And then we'll see. If they want to keep playing that game, I'll work up more for it. I'll have more ready to go. Where else are we at? So I'm working on Cold Plague, as I said. I don't know anything about Mothership. I was just rereading some Delta Green stuff the other night too, and thinking, boy, I should run this because this is a kick-ass setting and game. It really is. It's Delta Green is really just amazing. I haven't looked at Mothership, so feel free to elaborate. Well, this is where I am as far as the writing. I started on the kind of the world overview chapter of the book. I think I'm at a point that I need to start getting the material all done in the formatted fashion, in which is eventually going to be put to a layout to be published. And the one thing that I don't really have yet is this very kind of coherent narrative on the world. So I started that last night. And I started off with a conversation between two characters in the world. So more of a fictionalized version versus here's the history of the world. Now there's going to be a section which just lays out a history and timeline. That's going to be in the appendix or the GM section or something. But I wanted kind of the intro to the book to kind of bring you into the world. That was kind of my goal. Cold Plague, I've got some notes for that. I don't really want to show that. Yeah, that sounds cool. That sounds right up my alley. That sounds exactly what I like. I would definitely. I mean, that's the kind of thing I would normally say. Well, maybe I don't need a whole system just for that. It's kind of like the old Gods of Appalachia RPG that's coming out. I've been listening to the podcast for quite a while. It's a fantastic setting and story, but I'm like, I could use Call of Cthulhu for this, But it would be interesting to see. I'll probably get at least a PDF of it and take a look at it and see. And I would check out Mothership because I'm a big fan of Space Hulk and Aliens and that end of 40K. That end of 40K, the kind of cosmic horror ish, unstoppable alien force end of 40K. All right, yeah. So that's pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. Cthulhu-ish in a way, because that's all percentile. I remember Marvin, who comes on here periodically, made the comment once that he's like the weird thing about Cthulhu is you got to roll under something to be good at it. I'm like, yeah, well, it's percentile. I'm like, you have an 80% chance to score. You don't want to score over that. It's hard to wrap your mind around when you've only played in terms of like target numbers and challenge ratings and stuff. Yeah, but things like Delta Green, things like Mothership, that goes back to what you said before too about those are such niche audiences. It's the kind of thing the person who gets into it gets really into it, but it's not the kind of thing that has a broad appeal. And we've discussed this a lot with horror. Like horror at all, the aspects of it don't appeal to a lot of players. Being uncomfortable does not appeal to why a lot of people play these games. And I was wondering what this blue light is. Is this little light at the end of a USB hub? I'm like, why is my face glowing like purple? I mean, it's just kind of the lighting of this time of year. But I was like, why is there like this weird, bizarre light on my face? I was like, oh, that's it. Um, yeah, horror is not a thing a lot of people deal with well. And even a lot of RPGers who like horror, who like creepy stuff, don't necessarily like having the character subjected to it or being forced to confront it in a role playing environment. In some of my earliest chats last year at this time, or just after last year at this time, talked a lot about horror and RPGs and seeing my group respond to aspects of it. Because again, this is a D&D group through and through. The group I normally play with, the bulk of the people are heroic fantasy all the way through. That's what they like. And putting them in a situation of horror was interesting. And the first time I ran it, it was very encapsulated. It was very cinematic. It was very controlled. The second time where they made the characters, or at least had some character agency, they had a lot of trouble with some of the horror aspects. That's pretty cool. So that's something I've thought a lot about. And in fact, one of my upcoming Wednesday night talks is going to be on sanity. Because let's face it, the way that Call of Cthulhu handles it is extremely dated and extremely flawed. And we all love Call of Cthulhu. If you love Call of Cthulhu, you love it, and it's the way it is, and the sanity system's in there, but it's basically another hit point system. I use it like a stressor system. I use it like a mechanism to gauge, how stressed out a character is and how they're responding to the environment and the unraveling of reality, right? But it's really not caught up in any way to any some modern, forget modern game system, modern concepts of what mental health and stress and PTSD are all really really all about. It still is operating on a 1920s version of what sanity is. Well, right. Exactly right. It reflects that time. If you're playing the 1920s, this idea that you're losing your mind and you're going to cure it through some, again, it is this very archaic way of looking at mental health, and it is cringy. And when I go back and read, especially some of the earlier supplements now, it's really cringy. It's really cringy. And for as much as I like the game, yeah, it's definitely not up there with our current standards of how this all really works in the real world. And that's okay because it is part of the game. I have better solutions, but to run Call of Cthulhu, especially publicly, I'm going to run it by the book, but I'm going to say, look, just because you're losing your sanity doesn't mean you're just turning into a drooling idiot. It means you're becoming stressed. It's one of the best examples I've seen. There are two examples I can think of recently. One was a movie, a B-rated horror movie, which was not inherently very good. But the way the characters reacted to the monster, to the threat, in various degrees, was a really good example. But the other thing I could think of is Black Summer, Netflix's zombie show, which is really stressful to watch. I mean, it's like it takes all the things with zombies and just amplifies it, and it's like, and of course, the worst part of the people. Like the zombies are scary, yes, but once you figure out how to deal with a zombie, you figure out how to deal with a zombie, right? But the people and how they treat each other, of course, is the absolute worst. But that to me was this excellent example of the erosion of boundaries and the shift of reality that occurs when you're subjected to these really shocking, unexplainable events. The Lighthouse was another one, the movie The Lighthouse, which I know a lot of people hated that movie. And they like just, I don't know what they thought it was going to be. I think they thought it was going to be like bad CGI tentacles or whatever. But that to me was like one of the best Call of Cthulhu movies ever because you never saw anything. You never saw a supernatural horror. It was the environment, the isolation, the fact that the longer these two guys were in this lighthouse together with these quasi unreal things going on around them, that they started to lose a grip on their own identity, on their boundaries, on reality. And I thought that was a fantastic way to handle it. And that's how I see sanity functioning. Not, oh my God, I see a monster. I've heard of After the War. Haven't played it, but I've heard of After the War. And that to me, though, in that case, that's like really like the opinion of the game. Whereas, like I said, it's Call of Cthulhu and most variations of it, these concepts of sanity are based on extremely unenlightened literature from the time of the evolution of psychotherapy or they say the early development of psychotherapy and understanding of mental illness. So that's one thing I always make sure to tell people when they sit down on a Call of Cthulhu game too. Like this is not going to be a realistic version of mental illness. That's not what this is about. It's as fictional as every other part of the game. Yeah, After the War I haven't played, but I've actually heard it's quite good. But these are all tough things to simulate. And they're really, really tough things, I think, for some players to dive into. Yeah, Cult was always that area that like we played a couple games of it, and when it got it, but it was definitely very much like the Clive Barker role playing game. The early versions especially. I haven't checked out Divinity Lost. I haven't checked out the new versions. Right, and you know what? You got to decide that. And speaking of something like After the War, it's got to be something that everybody involved really wants to dive into. Like this whole idea of gaming as some kind of therapeutic device, of some kind of psychoanalytical device. It's a really interesting concept, And I remember talking to somebody at one conference where they had played a game where they were all people in Berlin as the Nazis were rounding people up. And it was all about just playing through the trauma and emotions of a scenario like that. And even my first thought was like, who would want to do that to themselves? Like that to me. But apparently the characters, it's actually the part of a much larger system that deals with this and deals specifically with women's issues and deals specifically with abuse in the case of from the viewpoint of women, and and again, I think there's definitely a certain place for that, but that's definitely not the kind of thing I think most people want to sit down and role play, or that they can even sit down and role play. And early on, we've joked about Wraith and Cult and some of those games that came out like mid '90s that were these super dark, super heavy psychological games that were more like social experiments. They were more like, can you really endure this? Can Can you and your group really endure playing this and remain friends? You know. All right, that's cool. I mean, I'll check it out. I'll check out Mothership. Huh. That's pretty cool. Yeah, because I'm always looking for new ways to articulate it and implement, even if I don't change the mechanics of a game. I'm kind of reluctant if I'm gonna sit down and start doing these things publicly to do a lot with changing mechanics. I'd rather stick with something that everybody who might have access to a book or the quick start rules can look at and say, well, this is how it's supposed to happen. Just to avoid arguments, just to avoid issues. But I have no trouble saying, well, I contextualize things like this. You know, I treat it like this. This is how it happens. And this is why. Take a look at Mothership. RPG 0. And here it is. One additional drugs, including some made for androids. That's interesting. Huh, interesting. Ah, it's a box set. There's the Kickstarter. Pretty cool. You know what? These classes look familiar. And I'm trying to think, and the art for them looks familiar too. And I'm trying to think, somebody else showed me this. Now I'm trying to remember if it was a student or someone else pointed me to this and said, you should take a look at this. I think you'll like it. I agree. No more flipping around to find all the edge. So that's perfect. That's actually one of my goals for the game I'm working on. Like, don't give me a 250-page rule book that has this horrible table of contents and index that it just took us 20 minutes out of our game to find a single line that may or may not even clarify it. You know, um, and that's pretty cool. It's a cool game. So I mean, in addition to PDF collection, yeah, I'd probably be okay with a PDF collection. PDF at this point. Um, mm-hmm. See, yeah, I'll poke around. Got huge backing. That's good. Uh, yeah, it's a. I mean, really though, for like this whole complete set, $100 isn't bad. Not that I need to buy. Here's here's the here's the digital edition, $30. Yeah, yeah, I'll definitely take a look at that. That looks pretty cool. Delta Green even had evolved a little bit in terms of discussing sanity, discussing stress and all these other things. But what's interesting though is, like everything else, that when it becomes pop culture, it's treated differently. Like even reading some of the original source material on Mythos stuff, like particularly King in Yellow, and some of the kind of the books that the stories that originally inspired Lovecraft and dealt with sanity and dealt with mimetic and corruptive insanity. It's handled very differently than it is in most movie versions, in most game versions. The discussion, what occurs there is often a little bit more realistic. It's still dated. It's still set in the 1800s to 1900s in terms of what the thought of cause behind a mental disorder is. And again, we know now that seeing Hastur is not going to give you bipolar disorder. Like that's just not how anything works. That's not it. That's not the way the world works. Um, it is in fact though, I think, just a guide, a template, and this idea that these things distort reality. And that's the one thing that I think is lacking from a lot of these types of games, is that there are these monsters, there are these obstacles, there are these things to defeat or overcome in the course of a game session. They're not necessarily looked at in terms of you've encountered this thing and it's totally unraveled your concept of what's real and what's not. And I think part of that is that as you're stepping into a role playing game, in your role playing games, you already are fighting orcs and dragons that don't exist. The idea of running into a deep one is not that weird in a role playing game, right? Yeah, if you're walking down the boardwalk in Ocean City, Maryland, and you then had a deep one accost you, yeah, then I think your reality would be shifted, but still not in the same way that I think it's portrayed in most RPG versions of this, or even most movie versions of any of this. All right, Mothership's got my interest. Sold. You've got me interested. Let's see. Yeah, the sanity pattern stuff interests me. I think a game like this, I think combat should be deadly too. Like that's these kinds of space horror games. That's got to be a caveat. Like don't spend 20 hours of your life writing your character backstory. I mean, you say that about a Call of Cthulhu, then it takes you 2 hours to make the character, and that was always to me one of the big flaws of that system. And in Delta Green, your character's a little bit more survivable, but in original Call of Cthulhu, it was like, oh well, don't get attached to your character, but spend an hour and a half making it, especially when you had to do it all pen and paper. That to me was really like one of the biggest flaws of it. But in a game like this, where it looks like character creation is pretty straightforward, I don't see that it is necessarily a big deal to have a character who might get killed. I mean, I think you're a little more than Space Hulk miniatures, but probably not much more, because that's the kind of the impression I'm getting. Yeah, I mean, if I were going to spend $5 on the zero version PDF, I'd almost rather just get the yeah and that's pretty cool. I think I've gotten Tales of the Hard Land to half an hour character creation, which is pretty quick. Even one of the comments I got on feedback form from the playtester was, I'd really like to make a character because I don't think it. I think you'll have a lot of choices, but I don't think it'll be that difficult. And that was always my goal, like to give a lot of options to make a really customized character that could do some cool stuff, but not have it be this, Warhammer or Rollmaster or any of these old school games where it was like hours later. I'll never forget our first Twilight 2000 game where it took hours. Had to take 2 hours to make your characters, and somebody got killed 5 minutes into the game, and we were just like, I think we played it 1 or 2 sessions. So we were kind of like, I mean, that's even when we were like 16. So it was kind of like we spent all this time doing that. That wasn't very fun. The thing is, my style, and I've said this on all these little public tabs that I've put up about having me run a game. My style tends to be to keep it moving. Like even in combat, like you get to a point in combat where the player characters are going to win, and just say the player characters are going to win. Like don't make it a 2 hour procedure to kill that last guy if the player characters aren't going to win, and they're going to win sooner or later. If your goal is to grind the characters down and try to make them take damage for the next encounter or make them use the resources, I get it. That's a very old school way of doing things, but I get it. It's just a different way of playing, and I'm at the point I like to keep things going on. Oh, name your own price? Oh, cool. Thanks. Looks pretty cool. Yeah, I'll probably grab that. I don't mind buying it. I never mind buying a game that I think I'm really going to play or that I'm going to use something from. But just for a quick look. I hope you've been well. It's been a couple months, I think, since we connected on here. Past months have been actually a little weird for me. I traveled a lot, came back, kept this pretty regularly, then had a couple life things that I had to deal with. So I had some interruptions here and there, but I think we're getting back on track, especially after the holidays, because the book's got to get done. So I'm going to be here a lot. I'm going to be pretty much here focusing on that. Throw the developer a tip. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Just taking a quick scan through the PDF now. Did this appear in my downloads? Yes, it is. Okay. Small downloads. Okay, yes, it is. Like I said, I think it's the thing we're going to do. I will definitely buy a new version. Well, this is so Neil has said several times that he thought I should do like something like this, like a boilerplate version of Tales that's simplified and just put it out there, like on Drive Through RPG, like more or less for free. Like throw me a couple bucks if you want, and then do the Kickstarter. You know, I'm not object to it. I just don't have enough. I'm almost there, but I don't have enough quite there yet to put it out like that. But other hit locations. All right. Everyone loves games with hit locations. It's a little in tone, a little 40K ish too, which I mean that can't be helped. I mean Space Hulk, you know, is basically the movie Aliens. You know, it's just all intertwined. Scum. Hiring mercenaries. Scum. Motivations. Oh, here's the stress and panic resolve. Yeah, you know, and a lot of this is timing, and I'm really keenly aware of that. Like I have had that discussion with people about promoting my own game, and you know, the one thing that everybody has said, I'm still dealing with some physical discomforts. So stretch out a little bit. The one thing that everybody has said is that really what it takes is for somebody people pay attention to pay attention to your game, and that's how it is with everything. I mean, you know, I've been in the music world for over 15 years now. I've been in the music world longer, but as a performer, over 15 years, and that's kind of how it works there too. You know, like oh, this person who's sort of well known or popular looks at you and says, "Oh, hey, do you want to open for us?" Or "Hey, let me play your record at my your song at my party or whatever." I mean, that's exactly how it works, and that's kind of how it is with everything. That's kind of cool. See, there's a panic chart. That's actually really cool. I agree. I agree with your assessment. Crippling fear. Right, and I mean this is what kind of Call of Cthulhu was always kind of going for, but again, the way that it treats it is just really, really dated. Now, see, we played a game that had a really similar system, something Neil ran, where you had like the whole stress relieving thing. We didn't play Mothership, but it was a zombie game that had a really similar system to this. Nervous Twitch, those are always fun. Yeah, and stress is infectious too. That's pretty cool. But that's a good emulation in a closed environment of a ship as well. I mean, that's one thing that I think a lot of the media that deals with either this or nautical horror, you know, kind of gets right. Like, stress in an environment like that is contagious. Fear is contagious, and the more people that get panicky, they get panicky. Heart attack, instant death. Ow. Ow. That's very old school. That's like an old school critical hit chart. Yep, knife through the head. Your skull explodes. Your brains leak out. You're dead. You're like, what? Again, it's usually one of those games too that took me 4 hours to make a character. Like early Middle Earth role play. It was the source material on Middle Earth was great, better than anything that's been published since. But the system was very not Middle Earth. It was like more like trench medieval warfare. It was like the orc with a dagger disembowels you. You're dead. Okay. Well, I don't feel at all heroic there. I don't feel much like Boromir in that one. Much less anyone who actually survives. Yeah. Okay. So the new one is a little bit more. Well, the fear, body, insanity. Yeah. Right. And in some ways, this is reminiscent of the temporary insanity rules for Cthulhu. Like gaining phobias off of PTSD situations. I mean, that's legit. But right, there's a lot of stuff that's just you know it just doesn't work. Doesn't work like that. Even in remotely real life. Yeah, so assuming we're adding, you're rolling 2d10 and add your stress. Yeah, every point of resolve, you have a -1 to all stress rolls. So much of this is never an excuse for writing that doesn't hold up or rules that don't hold up. But so much of this too is how the game master chooses to adjudicate it. Like I was on the one Call of Cthulhu Facebook group, which is generally actually pretty good. But there was one guy on there who's like, the characters in my game keep running out of sanity. Like, I mean, it's not like hit points that we can heal back. And we were all like, I don't think you're thinking of it in the right way. Like you're thinking of it like hit points. And yes, on paper, that's kind of, especially in the older, iterations of the game, that's kind of how they work. They kind of work like hit points. But that's not how it should be used. Like just because you see a monster, especially if it's something you're used to seeing, you don't just lose hit points. And even if they fail to roll, like you got to really think like, okay, is this character really going to be that upset? I mean, like when I run that game in particular, like if it's a character who, let's say, is extremely socialized and is not a criminal, and they have to shoot somebody, I'll have them roll sanity. Yet, if a guy's playing a mobster, or or a World War I army veteran, he can shoot people all day long, and it doesn't bother him anymore. So again, these are all such gray areas. It's kind of like trying to adjudicate humanity in Vampire, and I haven't looked at the new version. I don't know what the new version of Vampire does, but the old version, it was such a mess because it was like it was not subjective from character to character, but it was so subjective from storyteller to storyteller. So you can play one guy's game and your character can set a bus full of orphans on fire and not lose sanity, because their character wouldn't be bothered by that. Then somebody else, it's like your character shoplifts, shoplifts medication for their mortal, cousin, and they roll humanity, and you end up losing humanity over it. It's like, come on, I'm a vampire. Like shoplifting the medication is probably not going to bother me too much after I've had to just go drink someone's blood to live. It's the same kind of dynamic that try to quantify these things ends up being this really difficult challenge. All right, I think I'm going to run today. I think I've hit my limit. I'll probably try to come on a little bit tomorrow while I'm doing some writing. Still recovering, but I'm definitely feeling better than I did. I'm able to do this, unlike last week where I just was out of it for days. Yeah, I think gradual progressions are a key. And like I said, even in Call of Cthulhu, there are times that I've slimmed back sanity loss and effects because I'm like, okay, yeah, the deep one of the ghoul is scary, but it's your mind can rationalize that in so many ways, But seeing like some shadowy elder horror, like you know, peel off a person's skin and they're still alive, like no matter how tough you think you are, that kind of thing is gonna have some kind of mental or emotional impact. Or if it's a character that really doesn't isn't used to seeing things that are horrific out of the ordinary, then it should have a different effect. And so much of it comes to adjudication. It'll be interesting. If I do start running these more regularly with people I don't know, it'll be interesting to see the response. But I will always explain to people before the game starts, like, I'm treating sanity this way. I'm treating it this way for this vast number of reasons. Everything from that it's just more realistic to it makes it for a more fun game versus, oh, I rolled wrong, my character goes nuts, in a very unrealistic fashion. In a very Jack Nicholson fashion. That's the other whole thing I could get into, the way that movies have always portrayed the insane is always really, now especially you watch even some real classics and you're like, ooh, yeah. Much like they portray things like ethnicity and prejudice, and you kind of watch even some real classics now and we're like, ooh, that joke was way more hits way more cringy now than I bet it did 40 years ago, where that kind of thought was just, oh, that's how it is. Yeah, that's really tough. I mean, that's yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I've thought a lot about that. I've thought a lot about that. Like, what often tends to create what we consider insanity is an instability. And I'd point to COVID. I'd point to terrorist attacks that suddenly people who always seem to be extremely grounded seem to have lost their grounding, and they seem to be thinking in a way that, to a bulk of people, not just to person, to a bulk of people, seems unhealthy or completely out of touch with reality. Like, where is that mechanism and what causes it? And yeah, it's not necessarily, I think I saw Bigfoot, I'm now insane. That's not how, that's the equivalent of someone really seeing a monster, right? Or whatever. Like, that's not usually where what causes it, but that slow separation. And it's funny because when you talk about people who are criminally insane, that's a big determiner. The fact that they often don't think of other people as the people, they don't think of themselves as part of a society they have to be accountable for. They're not insane in the traditional sense. They know what they're doing. They're clinically insane. They're clinically sane. They're even fully aware when they do something that's wrong. But at the same time, they're doing something that, by all accounts, is socially aberrant, socially unacceptable. Not even just like, oh, it's a little unacceptable. Like, no, like in any kind of functioning world, this just doesn't happen. So, but yeah, and that's the kind of the weird thing with trying to introduce this idea of insanity into a fantasy game. Like, what does it mean, right? Like, because if you know people can contact demons, like, okay, so where does that reality break down? Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. And that's the reality too, is that a lot of the Lovecraftian era stuff was really obsessed with normalcy, really obsessed with social acceptability. And in fact, we know Lovecraft himself was, even though he was so eccentric, he was basically like a basement dwelling QAnon guy, right? Like, he just like he lived in his own world. By some accounts, he was actually very friendly and approachable, but he did not deal with people in a normal way. For all we know, he may have had some spectruming, that by today's terms, and some accounts of dialogue with him, it would not be unthought of. But yet he was very obsessed with this idea of social acceptability. And in fact, even in some of his letters and in some of the notes on stories, it isn't even so much. I mean, he was racist, but it wasn't even so much like racially disparaging people, but disparaging them because of class. And I find that really interesting. Talking about like, the low class, basically the hillbillies, the low class country dwellers, and that's really interesting. And I don't think that was just a narrative device. I think that was him. I think that was him because he had these very specific views as to what was normal and acceptable and what wasn't. And I think that's something we overlook, in that all of that kind of discourse on insanity and normalcy has this huge weight of social acceptability loaded into it. I mean, that was part of the point of stuff like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and some of that early film and literature too that dealt with all this. That, what's considered insane because these people don't want to follow the rules. They're locked in a mental institution because they basically are people who just didn't want to follow rules, and that's that's an understandable thing too. And I do get that gray area, like, even as far as disassociation from reality. I mean, we can point to several cases where a disassociation from reality, with physical reality, tangible reality, is considered absolutely normal, but in other cases it's considered aberrant. So where do we draw the line? This is a big question. This is not going to be answered in an hour and a half straight or 2 hours straight. We definitely won't resolve the problem here, but it's interesting to talk about and to think about in a game context, especially in a game where it does feature this concept of insanity. I don't know that one. I'd have to. Yeah, a lot of my favorite stories aren't by authors who are particularly good. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, but the ideas are really interesting. Yes. I'll check that out. All right, I think it's unfortunately time for me to make the departure. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for chatting. It's good to talk after probably a month or two since we last talked on here. And see a few other people pop on. Hello to everyone who popped on, is lurking, or watches this later. I did notice it. Hopefully I'll see you again in the next couple of weeks. I'll be on tomorrow. I'll try to come on tomorrow for a little bit. Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. Thanks for chatting and giving some ideas and showing me Mothership. It's a pretty cool game. I'll definitely take a look at and think about how to incorporate it. All right, From the Tomes, Twitch TV, From the Tomes. Over on YouTube at Fox and Boar Games. Got some original content, some game playthrough stuff. I have a couple other little pieces that I'll be putting up there in the next week, maybe. foxandboargames.com. It's a landing pad for all the things I'm doing. Gaming. And for the Tales of the Hard Land role-playing game. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Fox and Boar Games. As always, thanks for supporting, liking, subscribing, recommending, following. All those things really help me make this a thing, help me to continue doing it, which I do intend to do. Check on during my normal schedule this week. Hopefully I'll be on as much as possible, unlike the last couple of weeks. So thank you all very much. Have a good day.